Welcome to yet another edition of Within WordPress, the podcast you want to be listening to. It's the podcast where you learn everything about all those people making up this wonderful WordPress community. With us today is all the way from Canada is Mr. Carl Alexander. Carl, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm excellent. I've been working out this afternoon, and that always sort of invigorates me a little bit. So I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah, you got some Atlas balls lifted.
No, this is just normal gym stuff. No, we
Okay.
don't always go fancy.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm afternoon too, so I know the importance.
Yeah,
I wish I was a morning person and I could actually go in the morning, but I go
uh,
afternoon.
I feel you on that one. I can be a morning person, but I'm typically not. So um, I ask this all of my guests, but um, where and what is the thing that connects you to WordPress? Where can people know you from? So how about you? You tell a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. So I got into WordPress in 2008. I was like,
Oh, gee.
I basically got hired at this agency, and they were like, I was their first WordPress developer, and I started their WordPress PHP team, basically. And then that summer, I found out there was like a WordCamp in Montreal. So I was like, oh,
Yeah.
let me go to that. And it was like one of the OGs. Like Montreal was one of the older WordCamps.
Yep.
And Matt used to come, so Matt was there that year. And I just liked the feel a lot, and I started doing meetups, and then the second year I started volunteering, and I started organizing events, and then for 10 years until COVID, I was a WordCamp organizer in Montreal and event organizer. And then I started speaking. So I spoke at
Yep.
the original WordCamp US. So um
That's the one in
and
Philadelphia, right? The first
yeah,
one?
that was the one in Philadelphia. So now actually at 2 out of 3 OG, regional, weird or, OG or big WordCamps that I've spoken to. I spoke
Yeah.
at WordCamp Asia this year. That was the
Cool.
first WordCamp Asia, and I spoke at the first WordCamp US as well. So now
So you
I
need
have to
to look
nail
at Europe.
the WordCamp Latin America. Like I have to get into the first WordCamp Latin America.
Yeah, you need
But
a
yeah,
trifecta. WordCamp Europe is unfortunately no longer an option for you to get the
yeah,
first.
no, it's gone. It's gone. I wasn't even traveling by then, when WordCamp Euro was happening. But yeah, so I've been involved in WordPress for a long time. Organizing events and speaking. You can find me actually. I didn't even plug my site yet, but I'm at carlalexander.ca. I'm also known for writing about really advanced work programming topics or just topics around WordPress. I
Yep.
wrote a book called Object Oriented Programming for WordPress, I think, that teaches you
I
object
think
oriented programming.
yeah.
I think it's using WordPress. I'm really bad at shilling my own stuff, but it's been a good book. Like it's sold. I've made like $30,000 with it, so it's like pretty
Oh,
good.
that's pretty
So
good.
yeah, it's pretty good, for a niche book about object-oriented programming, so
Yeah.
it's pretty good. So, I've been involved at teaching a lot of, in WordPress for a while and organizing events, and
Mhm.
now I'm working on, Ymir, which is basically serverless WordPress, which is what I
Yeah.
talked about at WordCamp Asia.
Serverless WordPress or Emir specifically?
Serverless WordPress that I talked about, specifically I mean, at the end, I felt bad because I joked about it on Twitter because I was like, I hate doing a talk and you're the only thing you can talk about. Like when you're at the end of the talk, when you're like, what tools can you use to to
Well,
do
you
this?
talk.
And then you're like literally the only tool that exists for that. But the talk itself was about serverless, WordPress itself. Like how does it work?
Mhm.
Why you would want to use it, what is it good for, and why I think it's important. Um, but I honestly, it was super well received. Like I've used to give 5 to 6 talks a year, and I
Mhm.
think that's the most successful one I've given. Like I just got a lot
Oh,
of
yeah. Nice.
inbound inquiries and things after. I wish it was on WordPress.tv. I don't know what's taking so long because, but it's not on WordPress.tv yet. So,
I
but
I
I'm
believe the
hoping
team
it'll
is quite,
soon.
yeah, I believe
Yeah,
the team quite has quite a big of a queue to process through, but, no, but that's
yeah.
exciting. Have doing a talk and then getting a lot of feedback afterwards is one of the most rewarding things, I think, personally. So
Yeah,
it's nice
I just
to
didn't expect a lot of interest, to be fair, and then a lot of so I'm gonna dive in a bit, but one of the problems that WordPress has is scaling, as I think you're a bit aware of that
yeah,
problem yourself. And scaling WordPress is a challenge, and it wasn't really designed for that.
maybe it's
And
nice to interject a little here.
yeah,
Scaling, I know what it means for me, you know what it means
okay.
for you, but for those listening who are not fully aware of what is scaling and when is the threshold of now we're scaling?
Oh, sure. I thought you were gonna explain it.
No, no,
No.
I can,
Okay,
but
so scaling
brought
here,
here
what
to
we
you.
mean is how to deal with. So you can have sites where your traffic is somewhat constant. Um,
Mhm.
and like the classic example is like if you get like Reddited or something like that, then like your traffic like spikes and then your site goes down. If you don't have like something like
Yeah.
Cloudflare in front of it or some other CDN solution. And a lot of the hosting companies are now very, very well suited to handle this kind of scenario.
Mhm.
But there's a different type of scaling, which is what is more uh, computing intensive. So it's scenarios where you're actually dealing with a lot of logged in users. So the classic example of that is if you have an e-commerce site
Yep.
and you're newsletter driven or you're sales driven, your site normally doesn't get a lot of traffic, but then you might get hundreds or even thousands of people showing up with a cart. And that cart
Is
isn't something
matched.
that Cloudflare can just cache for you. Like they're actually like it's actually like real data that needs to like it's something that needs to communicate with WordPress. So when that happens, WordPress has to be able to like what's hosting WordPress has to be able to scale to handle that demand. Uh,
Yeah.
that is very computing. So it's like more CPUs as opposed to just with a CDN. It's just like page caching. So like the HTML has already been rendered and then we just send it back. So that's kind of the long answer to that. But specifically in the case of
Good
serverless,
answer.
what we're interested in is that CPU side scaling.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of people came up to me after because they're like, oh my God, like I post these types of sites that like, it could be like a concert, like you have ticket sales.
Yep.
Like another example was I had a friend that ran microbreweries. So microbreweries, they release batches of beer, and
Yep.
then people will come in to, and there's a limited quantity of that too. So like there's an actual like need to not oversell what you have as well, right? Which is can
Yep.
be tricky
Yeah.
with caching. So there's all these very tricky, more demanding scaling problems that a lot of the hosting companies aren't really equipped to handle well right now, um, but that a lot of people are struggling with. And a lot of WooCommerce, especially, is very frustrated and struggling with. So if you like work with WooCommerce and you deal with these kind of scenarios, um, those are a lot of the people that came up and talked to me after. They
Yeah.
were either hosting companies that were hosting these sites, and they were like, how do I deal with this? And I was just like, there's no easy way to
No, no,
deal. Like, yeah,
I have
no,
nothing
go ahead.
to comfort you softly.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, but that's where serverless comes in. So that's what the talk was about. So it was like it explained how it worked
Right.
architecturally. Um, I would start
So
by showing. Yep.
yeah, no, I was gonna say, so what does that look like? Because, I think I think it's fair to say that we've all seen the various scenarios where a server crashes because WordPress got too much traffic in too short of a time frame.
Yeah. So
Um, yeah,
yeah. So how does that look like? Well, first of all, I think I should probably say what serverless means because everybody loves making fun of the term.
yeah,
So
yeah. Well,
are there
it is
still
a little bit.
I make fun of it in the talk too. I'm like, are there still serverless servers with serverless? And the answer is
Yeah,
like, yes, there's still servers.
yes, sir.
I'm not a big fan of the term. Whoever in whatever marketing department decided to call it serverless, you've done us a huge disservice. But it's the term that we have now, and we're just gonna have to live with it. But the idea with serverless is that it makes servers outside of your sphere of concern. So like you don't actually like people that work in JavaScript understand this super fundamentally. Like when they deploy the Vercel, they're never asking themselves, "Hey, how many CPUs does this machine have? How many PHP workers? Like how much RAM?" Like they're like, "What are these things?" Like I don't like updating an operating system. Like what's the operating system behind this? Like they're like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't care. And that's kind of serverless. It's that it abstracts a lot of this, this basically this need to know of servers. Like you just upload code and the code runs on demand. So how does that help with this specifically? Well, specifically, what this allows you to do is it allows you to scale that compute problem at a rate that nobody else can do it. So, maybe we can like I don't know if you do podcast notes, but I had like
I can.
a demo, like I did a technical demo that I prepared for WordCamp Asia where I did 4,000 WooCommerce orders in 15 minutes and we could see it like scale elastically to the demand. So to give
Yeah,
an
yeah, yeah.
idea, if you know a bit about servers, we went from basically zero PHP workers to basically 1,200, I think,
Oh, yeah.
in the span of a minute, um, like of a few minutes. So to do that with a regular architecture is essentially not possible. Like even with the most, you'd need something really well calibrated to be able to pull that off. But just
Yeah.
being able to spin up a site and then I threw 1,500 browsers at it, like people trying to buy products at it at the same
Uh-huh.
time. And so that elastic, um, like that way to elastically scale your compute is something that serverless is really good at. And honestly, the only limit I hit in that test was the fact that the load testing software could only give me 1,500 browsers to do the load test with. So it wasn't actually like, oh, this was like the limit that what like AWS Lambda or serverless could do. It was just, oh, like I need to ask for more. Like, and I haven't yet, but I thought that was like already impressive. So
Yeah,
for that,
that
it
is.
was
It is.
yeah. Again, how many people need this? Not that many. But what I talk about is a lot is that I I'm a technologist. Like I like technology. I like building stuff that nobody can think of or like find hard problems to solve. And there were a lot of hard problems to solve for serverless WordPress. But what this allows you is like we've talked a lot about like I talked a lot about these e-commerce sites, but there's also this
Yeah,
idea that what if you want to build products with WordPress? Like, what if you want to build, let's say, why, like one of the examples I gave at WordCamp Asia is like, why couldn't Gravity Forms have just a standalone Gravity Forms product like Google Forms or Typeform?
yeah,
And the reason for that is maybe just don't have the expertise to host something like that, like at scale. But like, what if you didn't need that? You know, like my favorite story, we'll get to like how I got to working on that, but like Ymir's idea comes from Laravel. Like Laravel has a product called Laravel Vapor.
yeah,
And I was there when Taylor announced it. And I was like, I'm going to build that for WordPress. And that was basically how I got started. But inside the Laravel community, there's a product called Fathom Analytics. I'm sure there's probably people that are going to listen to this that especially if you're in Europe, you probably might know them because they're a privacy-focused analytics company.
They were
And
originally co-founded by a Dutch guy,
oh, yeah, yeah,
Dennis van
yeah.
Koten.
Yeah, but now it's like Paul Jarvis and,
Yeah.
oh my god, Jack Ellis. But Jack Ellis has been, like, a really strong proponent of serverless, but what's been super insane with them is there are basically 2 people, 1 developer, and they're handling, like, you know, hundreds of millions of requests a minute with this
Yeah.
as 2 people.
Yeah.
And so that I'm like, just like, I don't know what cool things I mean, Ymir has a couple of cool products that people are building on top of it, um, but I'm just there to give you the tools. Like, what kind of like WordPress products could people build if they, you could abstract away the fact like your customer didn't even need to know it was WordPress, like, um,
Mhm.
and things like that, but you didn't have the budget or something like that to build out that infrastructure. Now you don't need to. You can just deploy code and then it just works. As long as you pay your
Yeah.
AWS bill, like, it works. So that's
Is that the
kinda like
TLDR for, Emir?
yeah, that's the TLDR with Ymir. I wish it was as simple as that because WordPress, unfortunately, wasn't designed to, scale, like, this way.
Mhm.
Like, um, I think there's still a lot of performance optimization that needs to happen, like, especially if you have a site with, like, a lot of plugins and things like that, the behavior can be it depends on the plugins. Like, some of them, they work great, some of them don't work as well, and it really depends on the plugins and what they're doing because
So that was one of the
I'd love
questions
to
I
say equivalent. Yeah.
in terms of compatibility. Is any site running into performance issues? Is that a candidate for Emir?
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
I
like
talk with Johnny Aris a decent amount, who's on the
yep,
performance team too.
he was on the first podcast of mine.
Yeah. So I talk with him, a decent amount about things. There's definitely things that happen that plugins do. But it's like in terms of plugin compatibility, like what plugins work and don't work, it's been very minor. Usually it's the ones that I don't want you to install anyways, like a security plugin,
Yeah, yeah.
like iTeam security or something like that. You don't need that. So that's another thing with serverless. Like it's read all that's a good and a bad thing. So if you come from a more professionalized enterprise environment, you will be like, oh, that's obvious. But you can install plugin. You have
Mhm.
to install the plugin and then deploy the code again because the entire environment is read only.
Yeah.
Um, so for some people that like I've lost customers because of that because they were like, why can't I install a team or something directly? And I'm like, well, that's not how you get the scaling. Like the scaling comes from the fact that everything's packaged and ready to basically be, multiplied by 1,000 or 2,000 times
Yeah.
in a split of a second. Uh, but that also helps with security because now you can't write anything. So, so that's why you don't really need a lot of these security plugins because, yeah, I mean, you need two-factor authentication. You need, like I suggest, like I have a small one that connects to the have I been pwned API. So like to
Yep.
make sure that you're not using, um, passwords that have been like basically hacked already, things like that. But in terms of protecting and reading the file system and all that stuff, you don't need that. So those are the ones. The other ones that cause issues are media library plugins. So the media library was by far the hardest part to get working on this because with serverless, you also don't really have a machine to upload the images to anymore. Uh,
Okay.
so
So
I had to
where do
rewrite
you
part of
offload
the
them to?
media library. Sorry?
So where do you offload them to?
S3,
Okay.
which there's a lot of plugins that do that, but they sync them in the background, but
Yeah.
there's no place to sync them from. So I had to rewrite the media library to actually like send them directly to S3. Um, that was
So
like,
on the let me make sure
yeah,
that I understand this correctly. On the WordPress install itself, not the active live site, but the installation where you do your content and photos,
yeah, when
does
you
it still
upload,
exist?
like when you open the media library and you say upload picture,
Yeah.
It'll look the
Every
same, but what's happening behind the scenes is I'm sending it to S3.
yeah. So, but the installation where that, WordPress install lives
Yeah.
is not production, it's sort of staging. Is that a good analogy?
I don't know what would be production versus staging in this scenario.
Production is whatever, somebody sees, as a live site,
Okay.
and staging is essentially whatever is the next version of the production site.
No, no, it's like production. I mean, it's really just like WordPress wasn't designed again, like this is something if you deal with any other framework or Drupal or something like that, if they're like, oh, like we don't actually want to send like let's say you want to upload a file, you can tell it like I don't want to send it to the machine. Like I want to send it somewhere
Yeah.
else. Um, and WordPress doesn't make that easy to do.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Like
Now, so
like
the
be-
my question, if I'm,
yeah,
just to
yeah, go ahead.
try to clarify for everybody listening who not doesn't fully understand, what serverless means in this context, do they still log into a WordPress site to do what they
Yes.
need to do?
Yeah.
When they hit publish, is it instant on production
Yeah.
visible? Okay, so there's no syncing in between what you see with some of those headless solutions.
Nope.
It is in that case, it's a little bit different, from, uh, traditional headless as far as that is a concept.
You could do headless with serverless. I actually did a blog post talking about it on the Ymir
Yeah,
blog. Yeah, headless is so serverless is about the infrastructure. Headless is about basically the markup. Like you're saying,
yeah,
I want to have something separate that handles displaying information, and then WordPress in that scenario just becomes a data source.
yeah.
So
Tha that's a good distinction to make because for most people, if we're hearing serverless, we're automatically inclined to think headless or, you know.
I think that comes from the JavaScript ecosystem because a lot of
It does.
what headless in JavaScript is also serverless.
Yeah,
So they use the terms, they sound like they're interchangeable, but they're solving two
but yeah,
different things.
yeah,
Um, which is like really good actually with headless too, because headless, like you, and if you have headless and serverless, then you really don't have to worry about anything, right? So you deploy your code and then your code scales as you need it. And then your front end scales as you need it. So it's painless because of that. But right now, if you do headless WordPress, there's always a machine handling that data source. So like
yeah,
you can still overwhelm that machine.
yeah,
Um,
easily.
easily with that. So it solves that problem. But yeah, the media stuff was tricky because like I said, the thing with serverless is that there is a less part in it. Is that, the machine, there's like one common question is like what like that you might ask is like, how big's the machine? Or how
Mhm.
do I SSH into the machine? Well, you
Yeah,
can't there's no machine to SSH to. There's no machine per se, right? Like there's just your code. Your code exists in the cloud somewhere, and then there's a machine somewhere. You don't need to know what it is. You don't need to know anything about it. It's going to run your code
that's a
when
very
it needs
interesting
to.
distinction.
Um, and but that causes problems when you have assumptions built into the software that there's a machine there.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Mm,
that's the problem with the media library. And all these offload media S3 or the human made S3 plugin is that they all work on with the assumption that you're going to upload that file to a machine somewhere. And then they
yeah,
can do something from that machine and then send it to S3. But because there's no machine now, you actually legitimately have to send the file to its final destination right away. So
that's a that's a very interesting thing because that makes whatever you're doing, quite alienated from core WordPress.
oh
Like
yeah,
the whole of WordPress, like everything in its settings and configurations assumes it's living on a machine
correct.
on the same
So
server.
there's a reason I'm one of the few people in all of WordPress that could have built this product because you needed to go really deep. Like Ymir plugin that integrates with WordPress goes really like low level in WordPress to trick,
Yep.
like it tricks everybody to thinking that they're on the machine.
How close are you to, I'm assuming the answer is yes, but I'm curious how close you are to actually wanting to rewrite core files.
Not close actually.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Color
actually,
me surprised.
honestly, it's the only thing right now that's not working, and it's just because I don't really have. I'm a bit worried because they want to rewrite the media library, but
Yeah.
that's why I'm talking with Johnny Harris a lot because I need to make sure that they don't rewrite it in a way that I can't um do something like this.
Yeah, they need to
Um,
understand your use case and
yeah,
incorporate it in whatever
yeah.
is
That's
the
why, like, I spent a lot of time with him after WordCamp Asia, just going over the tech and how it worked, just so he
Yep,
understood that. Just to have somebody that understands that scenario. Because, for example, one thing that doesn't work right now, and that's also because I'm not a very strong JavaScript React developer, is that the media block, like the Gutenberg block, there's two
yep,
ways to interact with it, right? You can just upload a file directly, or you can just click on a tab and go to the media library and
yep.
interact with the media. But the just the plain upload button does not work right now with Ymir. Because I haven't been able to rewrite it to do what it needs to, what I made the media library do. Um, but I guess the media library is the closest I came to hacking core. So um, I basically unhooked the JavaScript files, default JavaScript files, and I made copies of them that I maintain with the changes, and then I replaced the media library like JavaScript files with those.
Oh, that does sound very hacky. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I didn't say that I was like making this like super like legit, but I don't hack core files, so that's all I'm
Yes,
saying.
yes.
There's no core files that were hacked,
I
but um, but I do
I
unhook
run that sometimes.
JavaScript files, and luckily they're not edited a lot, so I keep
Yeah.
track a bit of it.
True,
But
true.
they don't. It's all really old code that doesn't get changed a lot, so it's been
So does your
relatively
plugin
stable.
need to work with the latest version of WordPress, or do you, like, maintain, a few versions, backwards, or how does that work?
I don't. It's so the what I interact with is so old and so baked.
Mhm.
Like it's stuff like I interact with like the uploads URL filter or,
Yeah.
like they're just like really old hooks that aren't likely to be removed or touched. So I haven't had like version compatibility issues. If anything, I've taken it pretty seriously. Like I support PHP 7.2 and up.
Yep.
Um, so and that's one of the cool things with serverless too, is like if you deploy with PHP 7.2 and you never change the code again, it'll work in 10 years. Because the code was uploaded and it's there and they just have to run it. So, um,
And since they're interacting with a static version, it doesn't really hurt if the
no, exactly.
17 isn't
Correct.
isn't
Correct.
isn't up to date.
Correct.
That
So,
in itself is an interesting use case.
yep.
Are you stuck in 7.2 for whatever reasons? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So planning to support it for a while, even though like it doesn't cost me anything to keep supporting it.
right. So from a there are different perspectives from where that might be, something you do. Um, here's an interesting, thing. You've mentioned, S3, Amazon. Is there any other cloud hosting service that you could work with or already work with?
No, I don't want to. I got that question a bunch of times. There's a couple of reasons. I even talk about it in my talk, the WordCamp Asia talk.
Yeah.
One, um, so I'm gonna be a bit harsh. If you're a GCP fan here, I'm sorry. I would never build my business relying on Google Cloud. Um, they deprecate. They don't respect backwards compatibility. Like, imagine you're me and I'm one person. I have to like build something that's incredibly complex, deals with, I think I'm up to 15 to 20 services in
Yep.
AWS that Ymir interacts with. and those services could have their API changed. They could be sunsetted at any time. Like I
Yep.
would, I would be, I would be stressed the hell out, like having to maintain that. So that's one of the reasons. So like, this is why I don't do GCP. In fact, I joke that I would probably support Oracle Cloud before I supported GCP. Just that's how my that's like how low my cloud engineer opinion is of GCP. But let's say Azure. Azure is like legit. Like so the reason why is because even though they all have these kind of similar services, they don't work the same way. They don't
No,
interact the same way. They're not interchangeable.
no. So you would need to
And
write an API layer just to be able to.
I think more than that, I might have to do a completely different architecture
Oh,
of
okay.
how I even host it, right? Like it depends how it works, what they have, what features they have,
Yeah.
like how the different services behave and things like that. So it's not it's not a one-on-one thing. And then the other aspect is that in general, all the energy around serverless right now is all on AWS. Like, so there's like in PHP, there's something called breath. It's this guy named Matsu Napoli, and he built that. He's the OG person to work on serverless PHP. So
Okay.
he did it before Taylor did Laravel Vapor. And we owe a lot to him. Um, but he only does AWS too. Like it's just all the energy across all the different programming languages is all focused on AWS. So you'll find better resources, tutorials, answers to problems. So it's not super
Okay, that
useful.
makes sense. That makes
Yeah.
sense. I'm asking it from not even necessarily from the Azure or Google side of things, but what if I want to maintain where my data is and have my either my own cloud or
Yeah.
Ocean, Linode, whatever. Oh no, wait,
I
it's
mean,
not
the
Linode
thing
anymore,
that,
right?
no, they call it Akamai now. It's
Oh yeah,
Akamai Cloud or Akamai Hosting or whatever. But
yeah.
yeah, they renamed it. Um, I mean, there's Hertzinger too in Europe. That's really big. I don't think so. Behind the scenes, what runs Lambda is something open source that AWS open source called Firecracker. Um, and you could technically host something like Firecracker on a machine and then try to do it. But the reality is that one of the things that I think you can appreciate this, but I think a lot of people don't necessarily appreciate when they like it's really easy to jump at these cloud providers and be like, wow, the markup's like so crazy. Like I could just get this like $5 vulture box
Yeah.
and just like run things there. But they've abstracted like as somebody that's been a sysadmin since like they're 16, working at law firms, like I did like multi data center redundancies with VMware when I was like 20. Okay. And I was like,
I,
um, they abstract a stupid amount of infrastructure complexity
yeah,
to a simple API call.
yeah,
Um, l- there's more to hosting serverless than just having like a machine with Firecracker that you can deploy this thing on. Like, how do you make sure that it works across data centers? How do you do like failovers? How do you do like,
yeah, yeah.
if performance between the two, like if performance on one machine is degrading, how do you fail over to the next one automatically? Like
Yeah.
they do all of that for you. Like,
And
and
you would have to spend an enormous amount of energy and time
oh
to
yeah,
make what Ymir does work on
oh
other
yeah,
platforms. So it doesn't make sense to even start
yeah,
considering going in that direction. Okay, yeah,
yeah. Even for product people. So here's a discussion I had at WordCamp Asia. So I was talking with I think engineer one of Elementor,
yeah,
and we were talking infrastructure and things like that. So like they have like five or six, you say, don't take my word exactly for it, but um they have five or six like infrastructure people just to deal with their Black Friday sale.
Mm.
And they were like talking how they have this like Kubernetes stack and it works so well and stuff like that. And I was like, well, what happens if your platform changes or something code changes? They're like, oh, we have to recalibrate everything.
Yeah. Yeah,
It
yeah.
was like, we have to recalibrate everything. And I was like talking about what this does is like, oh yeah, this is like simpler because like, yeah, it might not be as well calibrated, but it works like you just upload your code and it works, right? And there's a lot of stuff that you would have to do yourself that gets kind of like folded into this extra cost that you are just thinking, "Oh, this is expensive." And you're right, it is more expensive. Like their CDN's a bit more expensive than Cloudflare. Their
Yep.
compute's a bit more expensive than Cloudflare. But you know what you never hear of? You never hear about like, AWS going down is a very freaking rare occurrence. And
A few
like
years back,
like I
it was
joke and
big, uh,
yeah,
but
and
it
when
is
I
super big.
joke about it, like if your site goes down, like if you're hosting on AWS and your site goes down because AWS has an outage, you're the least of your client's problems right now. Like half the
Oh, for
internet's
sure.
probably out
For
like
sure.
at the same time. So it's just there's just a like I take it super seriously, like as well. Like Ymir, I consider to be there are people now trying to build hosting products on top of this. And I take it really seriously the same way AWS does. Like my test suite for Ymir takes 12 hours to run. Um,
Wow.
just to make sure that it actually does what it can do and it's resilient and people can, there's still bugs and things like that. But I make sure that things don't break.
12 hours
Um,
is
well,
that's
you got to provision resources, apply changes, make sure that they work, that the behavior is expected.
yeah.
Um, and some of them I have to do across all the regions.
No, but
Um,
that's super decent. So
yeah,
you already answered one of the questions I had about Emir in terms of what it provides, because you mentioned in a nutshell what it does. It
yeah.
provides a set of tools for you to be able to run WordPress
Yeah.
serverless. You just mentioned that there are folks building modules on top of Emir that allow for hosting. So my question was going to be, uh, how much do you consider yourself as a tool provider versus hosting company? Because by the
I'm
sound
not a
of it,
hosting company, and that's really
no, I know, but
intentional.
okay, it is intentional.
It is intentional. I've rebuffed dozens of investment offers and also people asking me like, why aren't you building hosting? And because
Yeah.
um,
Well,
somebody's
that's
told me this, but it's hosting. The best analogy I heard it last year from Dave Ryan, who's at Newfold,
yeah.
and he said, and it was the truest thing. You will probably relate to this because you worked with Surfbolt. But a hosting company is actually a customer service company that happens to have a data center. Uh, and I don't want to, I love customer service, but I want my customers to be developers. I don't want
Right.
it to be, like just anybody. So I'm okay leaving that money on the table. But the thing that is happening, so here's like kind of my high level view of what's happening right now. So Emir is also a tool that you can just sign up and just like it's a CLI tool.
Okay.
Eventually, I wanted it to be a bit closer to Vercel. Like you'll be able to do a lot more from the admin. But right now, I'm not really losing customers because the dashboard's not really powerful. Like that's usually not how I'm losing customers. But so I got it to have that product where you can just bring up a WordPress site or like create a project or
Yeah.
but there's a subset of people where they just like this is complex tech and there's only like a few hosting companies that have the budget and the know-it-all to like actually like bring this forward. There's like I basically had WP Engine and Pagely, but I think actually Pagely got gutted with the recent layoffs. So inside GoDaddy, so I'm not even
Yeah.
convinced that GoDaddy could do this right now. So there's like WP Engine is really the only people that use AWS because Pantheon does not use AWS. they would have to develop some product like that. But the idea is that there's a really long tail of hosting companies that won't have the ability to do this. And that Ymir can be
What do you mean won't have the ability? Like the technical know-how or
the technical know-how specifically.
okay. And
Yeah.
is that because
That
of, the complexity of Ymir to even use it as a base
I
when you built
I think
your
it's not a complexity of Ymir. I think it's a complexity of just cloud infrastructure. It's a completely
right.
different skill set to design cloud infrastructure and wire, you know, a whole bunch of services together into a platform than it is to actually like just have spin up like Lino, like choose your server provider, Lino, DigitalOcean, or whatever, and spin
Yep,
up some machines using like let's say you're like there's a lot of hosting companies that use grid pane. So like they just use grid pane to manage their server fleet.
yep.
And so it's
So
easy
unless
with
you have
them
a
to do.
fully yeah, sorry, but, I'm gonna say, unless you have a fully, custom dashboard, uh, entirely built on, as an API,
Mhm.
then we're starting to make sense in terms of what could be hooked
Yeah,
into, Ymir.
yeah. Well, I mean, the main competitor to me right now of Emir, to me, the one that I think is the closest is actually WP Cloud.
Okay.
If you're not familiar with WP Cloud, because they're it's an automatic product, but they're really
Yep,
not very good at marketing it. It's basically a CLI tool that lets you spin up environments on their infrastructure, um,
yep,
and they basically want to use it as a kind of API for hosting companies to use and just have they would manage the infrastructure, and then via the API you would basically bring up sites and things like that and do all the maintenance around that. Uh, So I consider them the closest thing to what Emir wants to be in terms of platform, except I wouldn't even host the hardware. Like it's still your AWS account.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but the idea is the same, right? So you can have this API. So now there's an SDK. So Emir has an SDK, which I built for one of my basically potential partnerships that I just split the code out so that you have an SDK to interact with the Emir API. So that if
yep,
you want to build, like I had somebody building a Laravel application where the application would spin up the sites and stuff like that and
yep.
manage the sites, things like that. So that's like one angle where I'm going. And that's probably like the one that's gonna get me like not profitable, but like be able to work on this full time. Side note, a lot of my stats are public. Like if you go to emirapp.com/open, you can see it like I'm at 1200 MRR right now.
Mhm.
Um, but like I can't work on this full time still after 4 years. I started working on this in 2019. Uh,
I remember you
so
tweeting about this, a little while back
yeah,
with
so
the,
it's been a
MRR.
long journey. Matsu Napoli, who does Breath 2, we've talked about like because Laravel Vapor makes a lot of money. Like I estimated that in the first year he was probably making 500,000 from it. Uh, um,
Oh,
is so I thought, oh well, like I it shouldn't be that hard to make like a fraction of that.
huge
Incorrect.
mistake. Okay.
Incorrect. It's been very hard, to do, but
What is
there's
the main reason for
increasingly
that,
more
you think?
interest. Huh?
What is the main reason for that, you think? Why is it not picking up as you sort of anticipated?
Um,
Is WordPress the, is the
WordPress is a bit of a
majority of WordPress
challenge.
and customers on yeah? Sorry, go ahead.
There's a challenge, right? Like I said, it's not I wish I could say, like, you'll deploy any site to this, and it'll perform amazingly.
Mhm.
Uh, there's just one thing that we haven't talked. I know you had also Till before, but Till actually saved
Yep,
my product. Um, so one thing that is baked into WordPress is that what I talked earlier, this idea that you're on a machine,
yeah,
and there's a lot of gross inefficiencies, and you do a lot of performance work, so you're aware of that. of
Yep.
two. There's a lot of gross inefficiencies that get kind of basically papered over by just throwing more hardware at it, or
Yep.
just by being on the same machine.
Yep.
And the one thing
That
that can't get around when you start using serverless is latency. So
Yep.
latency, you now have to deal with like latency for those who aren't familiar with the term is just basically the time it takes to communicate with an external service. So it could be your database, it could be your Redis cache. When everything's on the same machine, that time is essentially zero. Uh,
Yep. In the
but
cloud, there's
once you
not.
start moving everything out of the machine, which you have to do, uh,
Yep.
that time becomes not zero. It might be incredibly small, but if somebody is doing something really gross, even if it's really small, um, it could cause a lot of issues. So what ended up happening early on, I have to do a case study for Till for this, by the way, but I'm just shilling his product right now. But
Yeah. 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 Well,
but
you should.
basically, what
It's a
happened
wonderful product.
early on is I remember testing WooCommerce with somebody, and we were doing load tests, and they were like, "Holy shit, that's amazing!" Like, okay, but we haven't added the object cache yet. It's going to be even better once we add the object cache.
Mhm.
And we added the object cache, and the admin went from loading like sub 1 second to taking 6 seconds to load.
Oh, the
And
other
I
way
was
around.
like, yeah. And I was like, wait, like, what's happening here? Um, and I ended up figuring out eventually it was that Redis. So the site was making, let's say, I don't remember exactly, but 1,500 requests to Redis.
Mhm.
So let's say a request you before it costs zero. So 1,500 times zero is still zero.
Yep.
But if now the time is 2 milliseconds, it's not a big amount. It's two
Yeah.
milliseconds, like trivial
Exactly.
amount. But you
Yeah.
do it 1,500 times, you now just added 3 seconds to your load time just to talk to Redis.
It compounds.
Uh, so that caused a lot of issues. And luckily, Till was working on a PHP extension for Redis called Relay.
Yep.
Um,
Which I think he released yesterday.
yeah, I mean, I've been using it. Like, I don't even ship Ymir, the runtime, like what runs PHP, doesn't even ship with the regular PHP Redis extension. It just ships with Relay
Yep.
because Relay is the only way that Redis can work. The way it works is that it keeps a in-memory copy of some of the data, and then it keeps it in sync so that you basically get that sweet 0 millisecond
Yep.
uh, latency for Redis, except for the first time when the cache isn't primed. But because of that, yeah. So that was like one of the examples. But basically, you can get a lot of these kind of gross scenarios where you basically are just papering over the problem with the machine,
Yep.
and then you're gonna put it in Ymir, and you'll be like, "Why isn't it as fast on the server?" Like, that's like every time that somebody says me that, like in my head, I have like, the melting smiley face like
Yep.
emoji that they came out with. Like that's like basically how I feel inside. Because then I have to explain to somebody that like it's it it's not like it's not a magical tool.
Right.
It doesn't
If it was
actually like yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, if it was magical, if whatever you threw at it, you would most likely see larger growth, is essentially what you're saying. There is still a
Um,
complexity layer.
yeah, I mean, there's also the fact that it's a CLI tool, and a lot of WordPress people aren't super comfortable with CLI tools.
That's a
It's like
shame.
more that it's more developer focused, and honestly, I'd rather do that than like you have to think we could have an entire other podcast on like how to design the business that you want, like because I think about
Yeah.
that a lot, and
Yeah.
it's just I love developers. Like I showed this to developers. Some of it some of the problem is just switchover costs, which I think coming from Servable, you understand, like, it's, like,
Mhm.
hard to get somebody to switch over,
Yeah.
to anything. Once they're in something, like, it's just the switchover cost is huge. So it's hard to get people to switch over even if they're really interested in using it.
We were doing pretty okay there, by the way. Just for, the switch costs were relatively low, because we were essentially white gloving most of that, and they were
Yeah,
already running into serious troubles.
yeah.
So they
Well, I do that when I have people with serious problems, but also I have to just be realistic that I can't, as one person trying to survive and not making enough to pay myself from this, like, there's only, like, so much white gloving that I can do with people, and it's hard when you do, like, I've done, like, sometimes 20 to 30 hours of customer service to someone, and then they cancel, and that, like, is just, like,
oh, that hurts.
brutal. That's brutal. I mean, they help make the product better, so I'm still grateful for them, but
Yeah.
that's always gonna be
Yeah,
a
but
challenge.
yeah, that's not how you intended for that,
No.
interaction to happen.
But I just thought there was more developers that were, like, secretly, like, Laravel lovers that were just, like, waiting for this, and the answer is, like, there
I
weren't that many.
No,
Um,
I think we're at the cusp actually of the eruption of, more developers like that.
I think so. I mean, I get more and more inbound interest, and especially once people have been working in JavaScript, like, I don't have to explain the product to them if they've done
Right,
JavaScript before.
right.
It's pure PHP developers that struggle a bit to understand what the value proposition is because they're like, well, one, this is way more expensive to host.
Mhm.
You can't host this for $5 a month. So I mean, I cost $39 by itself, and just like your basic on like always on stuff, like your database starts at $15 a month. So like you're basically looking at something like 60 something like 60 $70 US a month to just have one site.
As a
So
base,
it's a
and
lot
then
for
the EC2 comes on top of that, so the actual usage of um, the serverless part.
Oh,
Uh,
that's so cheap. I don't think people understand how cheap this is. So that 4,000, you know how much that 4,000 orders load test
yeah,
costs?
no, go ahead.
$10.
$10. Oh, okay, so that's not too bad.
That's
But if you were to
0.0.
say you have a WooCommerce site now,
Yeah.
and you're struggling to find hosting that works for your particular set of traffic. I think it's fair to say that if you're making good money with your WooCommerce site, you're fine with a bill of hosting somewhere between 250 and $500 a month.
Yeah.
In my mind, you
So
should be
that'll be
fine with
really
it
hard
because
to
that,
hit.
right?
That'll
Sorry,
be really hard to hit. That'll be really hard to hit with
with
the
Ymir.
load. Yeah, what you mean. Because don't forget, you're not paying for anything when nobody's around.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So in my mind, then the use case is much larger than developers. The use case possibly should be, and this is not me telling you how to do it, but
Yeah.
more me trying to understand, like, so for who, for anybody listening or watching,
Or
um,
watching. Yeah.
um, when is your scenario, when is your product a solution? And that's essentially a much larger set than developers like who enjoy working in a smart way,
Yeah.
understanding serverless. So the proposition that you have is much larger than that.
Oh, yeah, it's you I mean, it's bigger. I mean, the proposition is there's twofold. There's, like, on the hosting side, right, which we've talked a lot of, is
Yep.
these kinda the key use case is, spiky, non-cacheable traffic.
Yeah,
So,
and there's a
WooCommerce is
lot of
the
sites like that.
correct. So, WooCommerce, e-commerce is the classic kind of example. Another one that I was thinking about is, like, if you run your own EDD licensing server, like, you
Yep.
can DDoS
Right.
yourself and things like that. The other one is any sort of e-learning platform,
Yep. LMS,
um, LMS, because if you do,
membership
like,
sites,
those membership
buddy
sites.
sites.
Yep. So some of the customers that I have are e-learning. So they have kind of like live sessions of a course or
Yep.
something like that. And then everybody's coming in at the same time, logging in.
Yep.
a huge spike of traffic, and then when there's no course going on, the site's essentially dormant, right?
Yeah.
Um, so all these kind of spiky, what I call WordPress applications. So I think, like on the hosting company's side, like I had a talk with the VP of hosting, I think of Newfold, like at WordCamp US Lab. He's the one that really put me on the path for this. But it's like how to scale WordPress applications. So
Yeah.
because you have WordPress content sites, which are largely solved hosting solution. Like they
Yeah.
basically, I call them like every hosting company that basically sells you a vanilla, like it's kind of like getting vanilla ice cream, but you're getting a different flavor of vanilla. Like, oh, WP Engine gives you French vanilla, and GoDaddy just gives you like the soft serve vanilla. And
Exactly.
but they're all kind of
But it's still
vanilla.
vanilla
Like,
and it's still yeah.
yeah, they all follow a certain structure, which I gave a talk in 2016 on. Basically, they all follow the same architectural structure, and and it solves that problem really well. But because, like I said early on in the podcast, there's that type of scaling for content site where you're just getting bombarded by requests for essentially static content, which
Mhm.
is easy to serve back. That problem's largely solved. But how to scale what I call WordPress applications, like WordPress, where you're using WordPress, but as an application to do more content, like e-commerce, e-learning,
Yeah.
membership sites, like it could be also like buddy press, like community sites, uh, things like that, where you're actually dealing with a lot of logged in traffic, lots of what you consider like an application use case where it's your scaling requirements are more on the CPU side than just content delivery.
Yeah.
um, this is where Ymir really is going to be good. And that's where a lot of the hosting companies are going anyways, because that's where they all see, like, I know everybody in every hosting company at this point, because I was speaking at so many events. The only people you see at all the WordCamps are essentially hosting companies. So I just know everybody.
Right.
That's where they're thinking. That's why you're seeing a lot of managed WooCommerce coming out. And then you're seeing managed LearnDash. L- you're seeing these kind of like more specialized hosting solutions for these applications because they have different scaling requirements and hosting requirements.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is where I know that I'm the better solution than whatever throwing a machine at it, because there's only like I said, like just to give you an idea, like you're not, I assume most people here aren't really into like servers as much as I am, but let's say the biggest server you can get right now is something like, it's what, like 192, like, is it 192 cores and like, no, is it 96 core and 192 threads? But it's like somewhere
Something like that.
around
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Like the amount of PHP workers you could have with this is usually you can multiply it by basically two or three, the number of threads. So if you're like at 92, like cores and 192, you're looking at maybe 500 to 600 PHP workers.
Yeah.
If you remember, like I said earlier, um, when I did that load test, I went from 0 to 1,200
Yeah.
in a minute. So that is two and a half times, let's say, that largest machine you can buy on the market, which
Yeah.
basically costs you like $3,000 a month or something like that to keep running. Um, so there's just a limit to what you can do with a single machine. That's why like everybody else in every other business on the planet has like Terraform and like auto scaling and Kubernetes setups and stuff like that, because there's a limit to what one machine can handle. And
Yep.
nobody in WordPress is really tackling. There's a couple of hosting companies now, like Convesio is kind of tackling that a bit, but they're not they're not simple problems to solve. And this is so simple. Like, so it's just, but
This
and it's
being
really
in your
important to these applications. Yeah, with Emir. And
yeah.
with applications, they need that. Because
Yeah.
if you want WooCommerce to take on to be a serious contender to taking on shops that, like, if you want to start taking people that are on Shopify to start thinking about like coming to use WooCommerce,
You need to have
you
a
have to
solid
be able,
product.
you need to have a platform that can handle this. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, so there's just a lot of conversation that are happening around that. And like
So
serverless is the tool to do it for WordPress, I think. At least
yeah.
there's Kubernetes and stuff, but I think for most people, they don't have the budget that Elementor or like some big hosting
No, and
company.
it's a different level of complexity that you don't necessarily wanna find yourself in.
Yeah.
If you can solve that by, yeah, the Amazon platform and
I
Ymir,
mean, my
that's another.
personal yeah, it's right. My personal take on it is that Kubernetes is like a in between tech.
Yeah,
It's like
I
in between. I think for
I
most people, they won't need you to use it.
no, no, I agree. I think it's, um, I think I tweeted this last week, something about, you don't always need the most complex thing, uh, uh, just because it's there. Um, just try
No.
to think of what you can use in the most smart and most nimble way, and that's probably gonna solve your problem better than, throwing more complexity at it.
Yeah.
But it sounds like if I'm translating what you're saying and the use cases and the things happening, it to me, it sounds like you're on the cusp of breakthrough. Like, I see a bright
I think
future for
so.
Ymir.
I mean, I think so. It's just been long, man.
Yes,
4 years
yes.
is a long time.
Well,
But
you
I've been
there's
talking
more.
about it.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's more who have overnight success in 5, 6 years, so you're still
Yeah, yeah.
within that
I mean,
range.
I've been very honest. Like I said, I'm very public. I write a report every 2 weeks, that you can sign up to, like, where I talk about what I've done for the past 2 weeks. I usually do 1 week marketing and 1 week product,
Yep,
and then I talk about the business, but I also talk about it when I do a year in review as well. And I really hate how everybody uses the term, but if I for I'm in an innovator's dilemma situation. So if you don't know what the innovator's dilemma is it comes from this business book by this this famous professor called Clay Christensen. He passed away now, but he it's this book that discusses how technologies come and overtake previous, like new technologies slowly creep up and overtake um the like incumbent technology. And
yep,
a lot of the way of how it works usually is that the technology starts off worse than the current good stuff.
yep,
But for specific things, it is very good. And for
and then
those
slowly
specific
inverses.
things, yeah, and usually how they start off is they just chip away at it with those specific cases where it's really good, and then eventually they just overtake the other one. Um, a classic example, because it's an old book, so like he talks about mainframes, like that's like before servers, like it was like
Yep,
mainframes, but before the personal computer, and how like the mainframe makers basically eventually got overtaken by those
PCs.
personal computers
Yep,
because it was just mainframes needed an entire basement in a building to exist, and you had a little personal computer that eventually could do the same thing that the mainframe did, and took half the space, and you could put it on every desk in a building.
have you
Um,
ever seen one of those, rooms, by the way?
no,
I
I've
have.
okay, no,
I've
I
worked at
only
a
done server
insurance
racks,
company.
so
I've worked at an insurance company, and, we work with AS/400s and other, mainframe type stuff.
yeah.
There
I mean,
if
there's
if
still
you've never
now if you
seen.
work with insurance companies, I'm sure they're still there.
Yeah, probably. But just the you said it filled an entire basement, but when you said that, Carl, you meant that literally.
Yeah,
Um, they are that
it's
big.
they're that big.
Yeah.
But he talks about different scenario, not just computing. There was like motorcycles. It was like there's different use cases, but
Yeah.
this idea that the new technology always starts off worse, but it has a greater potential. And I think this is the scenario here because right now it's really good for the use cases that I've been talking about. And are there a lot of them? Like how many stores need like I had like when I was in Tokyo for 6 weeks and Automatics VP no the director of operations lives there half the year. I had
Mm.
dinner with him twice and I sent him that video and he's like, wow, that's crazy. We can't do that. But how many people need that right now? But that's not the question I'm asking myself is like, what like, if we want WordPress or WooCommerce to be a valid solution to take
Mhm.
on a platform, like, what do we need to think about for the next 10 years, to get us there? So, and to me, that's where I see it. Like, it's just, it's slow. Like,
I
I wish I could say that it was an easy ride, but that's what keeps me going is this belief that and the more time I spend, it was really hard too. One of the things that we didn't talk about is also I built this like during COVID.
Yeah.
So you kind of feel a bit insane building something like this during COVID and you can't talk to anyone or you're just tweeting at stuff. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
it feels a bit insane. It's gotten better once the in-person events started because I'm just a better in-person networker, but also like people are just like, oh shit, okay. Yeah, we have this problem and we're interested in talking about it.
You're only confirming what I suspected, in terms of, bright future ahead, because I think you are spot on. I think you are exactly at that, innovator's dilemma,
Yeah.
uh,
It's just
where
hard. It's hard when you have no funding and you don't want funding. That's
yeah,
another
yeah, yeah.
like I
You
said,
pitch
like, we should
the
do
crowd.
another, podcast on building the business you want. Because like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
could do another podcast just on that.
Well, we might end up there, but, for now, I wanna thank you for, sharing your story and, the whole, uh yeah, I think it's a large set of problems that your product is solving. I think it's a super interesting one. I'm going to dive into it a little bit more, than, glancing at your website.
Yeah.
So I'll have questions for you, after.
Yeah.
But for now, thank you so much, Carl, and, we'll see you on the next one.
Yeah.